I'm Julie Desch, and I'm 61 years old, and I have CF. And I want to share my story of a trio of small moments of kindness that made a huge impact in my life when I was a first-year medical student. Random acts of kindness happen all the time, and I don't think we know how often they happen because it's not publicized. But I think this podcast is extremely important because we need to see examples of the fact that humans are by nature good. And we don't see that often enough, in my opinion. We see examples of evil things that people do, and we don't see the good things that people do. So my trio of random acts of kindness started when I was deciding to go to medical school, and my sister was in Omaha, Nebraska, one of the places I could have chosen to go to school. And I was deciding to go to Stanford in California, thousands of miles away from her. And she happened to be dying at the time. So her random act of kindness was when she essentially gave me her blessing to go off and follow my dreams, to pursue a career in medicine that also included a career in CF research, or at least that's what I thought it meant at the time. The second random act was after my sister died, which was even before school even started. And I was so stricken with grief after a few months of being a medical student and not really able to process the fact that my sister had died. I went to the dean of the medical school, told him my story. He knew about the fact that my sister had died. He knew I was kind of overwhelmed with all I was doing. And he suggested very wisely that I think about it, that I cut out some of the stressors in my life, which at the time included working in a lab that wasn't a CF lab. And so I followed his advice. I did what he said. I let go of the PhD part of the program I was in and just went to school. And that really lightened my load. And I was able to continue on with my school. And then the third random act was given by a man named Jeff Wine, who gave me a position, a paid position, paid for part of my tuition, working in the Cystic Fibrosis Research Laboratory at Stanford. And that was a huge act of kindness because at the time I wanted to quit. I wasn't convinced that I wanted to be a doctor. I wasn't convinced that I had what it took to go into research or to even be at Stanford, frankly. And Jeff gave me that. He kind of breathed life into me as a medical student, and also he introduced me to a huge community of people called CFRI. And for that, I will always be indebted to him. So you just never know. You never know when doing something nice for somebody might just be a huge favor to them and might transform their life into something that is so much better than had you not done it. I'll start with first going to Stanford. I came from Nebraska, where I grew up. Leaving Nebraska, it was a very difficult choice for me. I could have chosen to stay there and go to school there in Omaha. And the tug to stay was not because of the University of Nebraska Medical School, although I'm sure it's a good school. The tug was because my sister lived in Omaha, and she had CF, and she was at end stage CF. So she was dying, and I, had to choose between staying, knowing that she was probably going to die very shortly, or going to a school on the West Coast where I knew I could pursue my the career I thought I wanted to pursue at the time, which was going into CF research. Stanford was a research institution. They had an MD, PhD program, which I had applied to and been accepted to. And it was kind of, a very clear decision for me, but for the fact that my sister was lying in a bed in Omaha dying. So I approached her with this decision that I had made to go to Stanford, and kind of to get her blessing, really. And she was super sweet about it. She understood. She knew why I had to go. She wanted me to go into CF research. She wanted me to follow my dreams, and did not want me to stay back and just be with her because she was dying. That would definitely not have made her happy. So she kind of gave me her permission, really, to go. And so we came out to Stanford in May of that year. I think it was 1983. I got situated in the lab that summer that I was going to follow this PhD program in. It was a pulmonary lab run by a man named Eugene Robbins. And I liked him. The research didn't really interest me that much. So I had already started to go to the lab 3 or 4 days a week that summer. School hadn't started, classes hadn't started yet. They weren't going to start until September. But on August 9th, well, actually, I got the call on the 8th that I needed to get home because Kathy was dying. So I went home and I was with her when she died. Then afterwards, we flew back to Palo Alto, and I didn't even have time to really process grief at all. I had to step right into that medical student role and start, dissecting a cadaver and, memorizing things. And that was just what I had to do at the time. So the fact that she just died and, having to deal with the fear about that as well as the grief was just like pushed aside until right before Christmas break. And on, I finished up my finals, and I told my husband at the time, Scott, I said, you know what, I just can't do this. I can't do medical school. I hate this. I hate everything about it. I only have a few years left to live. This is what I thought at the time. So why would I spend it torturing myself in doing this thing that I hated? Of course, I hated it because I was depressed. I didn't really hate it. My being, Julie, the me that wasn't sick, still wanted to be a doctor, still wanted to go to medical school, was still intrigued by learning about the body. But at the time, I was just overwhelmed by all this grief. So I went to the dean and I said, I don't want to come back. I want to quit. And he was a very wise man. He knew that my sister had just died. He knew that I hadn't had time to process anything. And he said, Julie, why don't you quit the job in the lab for now? Just put it on the back burner. Don't even think about the PhD thing. Just go to medical school. Just go to classes for at least one more quarter and give that a chance and see if you really want to quit. Because I think that is the PhD and the lab and all that is just a little bit much for you to process right now, given everything you're going through. And it was a huge relief, first of all, to have that other stuff kind of out of my head, and I could just focus on going to school. And then my doctor, my personal doctor at the time, who was at Stanford, Norm Lewiston, told me that I needed to meet this man named Jeff Wine, researcher who had just started a lab doing CF research over at Jordan Hall. And Norm thought that Jeff and I should meet just to chit chat. So I went over to Jeff's office on the 4th floor of Jordan Hall and sat down with this Stanford professor. And I was feeling very kind of, overwhelmed by the whole thing. But Jeff was such a nice guy. I mean, first of all, it was like talking to, a favorite uncle or something. He was just super sweet. And we talked about his daughter, Nina, and her diagnosis and how he had changed his entire career focus over to researching cystic fibrosis and trying to find a cure. At that time, this was 1984, and not much was known about it. He just offered me a job. He said, why don't you come work here? And this can be the lab that you kind of pursue your research aim in. And it paid for a significant chunk of my tuition during the couple of years that I worked there. It dragged me out of my doldrums, that and the fact that I was starting to like school again. Here I was working in this lab called the CF Research Lab at Stanford. Like, it took away some of that guilt that I was feeling of leaving my sister. I was doing what I had set out to do. And not only that, but coming to Stanford, I didn't know anyone with CF in Nebraska. I didn't know anybody with CF except my brother Tom and my sister Kathy. I didn't know any parents of kids with CF except my own parents. So I had no CF connection really at that point, other than with my brother, because my sister was gone. And now working in this lab, the project that we were working on was a project where we would bring people in, make them sweat by injecting a certain drug into their skin, and then collect the sweat and measure the sweat. So we were bringing in all of these parents of kids with CF, as well as some CF patients themselves. All of a sudden I was meeting all these people that either had CF or they were parents of kids with CF. And I kind of discovered this family of people that was kind of under the umbrella of cystic fibrosis research at Stanford. And it was called CFRI at the time. It wasn't CF research at Stanford. It was CFRI. So I met all the people at CFRI, and they became like my family, my CF family. That small act, that little offering of a position that Jeff did for me, I don't think he knows that it saved my life, but it did. It totally saved my life. It pulled me out of depression. It gave me incentive to keep going in this career field that I had kind of lost all faith in. So you just never know when doing something that seems extremely small for you might make a huge difference in someone else's life.